Hey, welcome to Gold Scratch. And the first point, happy Thanksgiving to all our friends in the USA. I think something like almost 85 or 90% of all my subscribers and viewers are in the USA. So obviously, wish you guys have a great day. I spent lots of Thanksgiving days in the US in the past too. Anyway, so today what we're going to do, this is a continuation of the video about Will Casey's 350 1981 Corvette build, and since the last video we've made a lot of progress. The short block's together and the heads are on it, and we're going to go back and describe to you all the steps that we took to get from where the last video ended up to this, using a slideshow. So Mike's going to create a slideshow. We took pictures along the way. I didn't have somebody to hold the camera, and I think actually this is more efficient. It'll save you time. We can go through the steps a lot quicker. We took a lot of detailed slides, and I'll kind of narrate the slides. Where I'm at right now, the short block's together, heads are on, and I just did a check of pushrod length. Before I forget, going any further, please like and subscribe. Our subscriber list is growing nicely, and we're encouraged by that, and that's why we make videos, and we'll keep making them as long as you do that. So I'm also if you can, share it. If you share it with somebody else, YouTube gets the idea that you might have liked it, and they might show it to somebody else too. So all those things that you can do for me help make videos make sense. I'm also going to have a tip of the day at the end of this video. If you're calculating compression, try to anticipate when you design your engine, a tip of the day to make sure you get that part right. So we'll do that at the end. So where I'm at now, just got the heads on, the short blocks together. Once again, we'll cover all those steps. And I did a check of push rod length, and the push rods, the standard push rods for Chevrolets are 7.8 inches long, and I need 7.65 inches long. And for that reason, I'm stopped. I just ordered them, and I also ordered a new set of poly locks. We're going to use these GM Performance rocker arms on this engine. So when I did the dyno of my 406, I used a half a set of 1.5s and a half a set of 1.6s. So for this engine, we're going to use the other half a set. Checking push rod length, that's where I'm at right now. So this little guy is really helpful, and this is an adjustable push rod. So the way we do that is stick the adjustable push rod in there, just push this little duck's beak on, and adjust it until we have no gap on the side of the valve and no gap on the side of the push rod. And that gives me the right push rod length. And then I take that push rod out and measure it with my... The only reason I have this tool is because it can measure push rods. I haven't found many other uses for it other than when we did Mike's gear change. We measured the length of his carrier and his rear end with it, and that's how we determine the right length. So the number we get, I documented already. I measured 7.805, the original push rod. Actually, the official length is 7.800, and the checking length is 7.675. So we're 130 thousandths or so too long. So I just ordered a set of push rods, and they're going to get a new set of poly locks at the same time. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and put the intake manifold on, the rest of the accessories on, put it in my test stand, and when I get the push rods on Tuesday or so, I'll install those, and we'll have this engine running in about a week. By the way, I ordered the push rods and the rocker arm studs from Bill Little, Belmont Automotive in London, Ontario. He's a dealer also, and he's going to have them for me for Tuesday. So if you're looking for hard parts, serious parts for engines, he's the guy to go to. And you're going to see Bill again tomorrow. I'm going to be going with him to Daryl's dyno, and we're going to dyno. He's going to dyno. I'm going to watch and narrate. Master at work. 565 cubic inch big block Chevrolet engine that's going to make something over 800 horsepower. So if you find my 400 horsepower engine exciting, you're going to like this one for sure. So that's will be our next video as well. So we need push rods, so we're stopped, and we're going to go ahead and once again get the engine on the stand, and we can do all that later. So what have we done here? Since we started this build, when we first measured the compression height and the quench height, the pistons that we were going to use were down the hole almost 40 thousandths of an inch. So if you add that to our 23 thousandths head gasket that we're going to use, obviously the quench height would have been too much. So we ordered and received a set of pistons. They're also seal power pistons, but you have 2 valve reliefs instead of 4. You have 5 cc's instead of 7. And they have a compression height, which is the distance from the center line of the pin to the top of the piston, 12 thousandths of an inch more. And so that gets our dynamic, or our quench height in the range of 049 or so. What's the right quench height? 045 is probably a nice number. Some guys go less than that, 040 if you're going to go higher RPM. You know, more quench, the tighter your quench, the better, until your piston hits the head, and then that's not good. So to be safe, I think an 045 is a pretty safe number for a street engine. That's going to turn very safe, 5,000 to 6,000 RPM. So also what we gained by doing that, we got our static compression up from 9.96 to 10.48, and our dynamic compression now, and so our calculation based on our experience with dynoing, this is a good metric to use for an engine that's in a range of 400 horsepower. 1 point of compression, say from 9 to 10, is worth 4%. So 4 fours, that's 16 horsepower. So we're going to half the compression height, so we're going to expect maybe we might get 7 or 8 more horsepower from the increase in compression. And that's going to, our calculated dynamic compression now is going to be 178 psi, not including any losses through dynamic compression leaking past your piston rings. And initially we will check that before we go to the dyno with a leak down tester, or a compression tester and a leak down tester. And so 178 or maybe a little less than that will be what we expect. So, and that's my guideline from the past. I've talked about this a lot of times. 160 to 180 is a nice street engine. I think you're still pretty safe at 180 or so with pump gas. Guys go higher. I get lots of comments on my channel about you can go higher than that and you can do whatever you want, but I'm sticking to my 180. So that's what this is. It's going to be 178 psi. For achieving that 178 psi, a lot of comments, you should have decked the block, and that is an option. One of the problems with that, we started off to be a budget build, and probably is a little bit more elaborate than that now, but we still did not go to a machine shop with Will's block. I did all the cleaning myself, all the preparation myself. And if you take the machine shop to deck a block, they're going to hot tank it and magnaflux it, a whole bunch of stuff, and you'll be into some pretty serious dollars. So our solution was the piston deck height to get our quench height in order with the original deck height that deck on the block that we had, and so we avoided doing that. And so let's just sum up what this engine is, by the way. So it started off as a 1981 Corvette engine that had, I said 170 horsepower or something. And yeah, if you took that engine out of Will's car, took all the accessories off it, tuned it, put a good carburetor on it, it would probably make 225 or something like that. So To be fair, they weren't quite as bad as it sounded. But we're hoping to get quite a bit more than that. So now, we already mentioned we got 10.5 to 1 static compression, 178 PSI of compression pressure. I sold Will a pair of GM Performance aluminum cylinder heads that came off a 604. So as you can see from the markings, they're not sister and brother, they're cousins. They came from different mothers, but they're exactly the same casting, and they'll work exactly the same. We've actually flowed these heads. Bill Little flowed these heads for me, and they actually flow more than we're going to need for this engine, because that compression, these cylinder heads that will flow, I think we flow 260 CFM at a 1/2 inch lift. And then the camshaft is Howard's camshaft, 470, 470. And we got this in, it's actually 104 degree center line, and I agreed to cam in, and it actually came in at 102 degrees. And so I left it there because in time, the timing chain will slip a little bit, and it'll probably be closer to 104. And the other thing is, there's only 3 notches on this gear, so if I take the next notch, it's going to be 2 degrees retarded, and I don't want to do that because it's going to retard even more. So basically, as close to the center line as we could get without a variable cam timing. So the other thing to make note of, when I agreed it, the first thing you do is find TDC with your degree wheel, and using this aftermarket stamp timing tab and the original pulley harmonic balancer, it's off for almost 4 degrees. As you can see, my 0 mark now is when the timing mark's at actually 4 degrees. So if you don't do that, you won't know. Now, when we go to the dyno, that doesn't really matter, because we're going to find out where it makes the most power, and we're going to mark that on the tab, and then we'll go with that, or we'll go with that in the future. But if you just stuck it in and timed it, you could be off by 4 degrees. That's life. So things you learn by checking. So the camshaft, by the way, is also degrees 275, 293 advertised, 221, 231 at 50. And so it's a nice cam, and it should support all this together, being optimistic. At best, close to 400 horsepower maybe. We'll see when we get to the dyno. So that's about where we're at with it right now. And we're going to go back and go through the details of how we got here. What we're going to try and do to save you time is we're going to make a combination of videos and a slideshow. I'm going to narrate the slideshow. I didn't have someone available all the time. I had to get this engine together. It's got to get on the dyno next week. And so for that reason, I needed to get work done. And so what I did is I took a whole bunch of pictures, and we're going to narrate those pictures. I already sent these to Will, so he knows what I'm doing to his engine and for his engine. And we're going to narrate those pictures going forward. And Mike's going to put together that with some of the video and try to make it all make sense and follow the chronological order, so it's helpful for you if you're going to try and do this. Okay, let's start with the pistons. As we already mentioned, we started off with seal power pistons, and we ordered, and when we got those, they didn't come with any locks, so I went and bought some spiral locks from Bill Little, and found out after that that's not what seal power provides. And spiral locks are a pain to put in if anybody's ever done it. I've done it, it's not fun. Anyway, the new pistons that we got with the higher quench height had these little sort of C-clip locks. And they were a lot easier to put in. They were really not much problem at all putting in. And so that's what we got. That's what this picture shows, is a C-clip installation. Next thing you'll see on my bench, when I get all the pistons ready to go, they're all numbered. In this picture, all the connecting rod clearances have been already taken. Crankshaft's been measured. Next is just a quick clip of the crankshaft spinning over. And this is just a mock-up of the crankshaft because I just put it in order to check the quench height, which we've already talked about. So There's the spiral locks again with the pistons. Not spiral locks, the C-clips. Okay, next thing after the crankshaft goes back in is checking the thrust clearance of the crankshaft. So the way we do that, we put a dial indicator at the end of the crankshaft and force the crankshaft back and forth. Typically we take a big rubber hammer and knock the nose of the crankshaft back with a rubber hammer, and then back again, and then use a screwdriver. And so the recommended thrust clearance is 3 to 9, and we had 6/1000 of an inch, so right on the number. We're real happy with that. And very seldom, we check every one, but very seldom I've ever had to do anything about it. Usually they're pretty close. And in this case it was right on. So next, just a picture of the crankshaft going back in, and this is also showing the dial indicator connection. Pistons laid out on the bench, all numbered. Once we give Bill a complete Excel spreadsheet of every cylinder bore, piston diameter, clearance, crankshaft diameter, bearing clearance, etc. So once I've assembled the pistons together with the locks and done all those clearances, I lay them out on the bench and in the order that they're going in the engine. So when it's time to do that, we don't have to look and check, it's easy to see. Next, the camshaft installation. So I would have liked to have a video of this because I got to use my new camshaft tool, which you'll see in another future video that's coming, clip that's coming up. One of the things to note when you get a box of camshaft bearings, there's really 3 different sizes of bearings. 1 is different than all the rest. 2 and 5 are the same, and 3 and 4 are the same. So we number them all when they're still in the box to make sure the order is correct when they go in the engine. And then there's an optimum location of the oil hole in the camshaft. And this diagram from the technical bulletin from the Automotive Engine Builders Association shows you the ideal location. So because the bearings are installed in the crankshaft, the block's upside down, we put that hole at 8 o'clock, and when you rotate it back around, it's about 2 o'clock. And as you can see from this diagram, it doesn't have to be like exactly there. There's an area where it's better than others. You definitely don't want it at the bottom, because the force from your push rods that comes from your valve springs pushing that camshaft to the bottom is going to make it hard for the oil to float out. And what you get in a rotation doing it this way is an oil wedge that floats around as the camshaft turns. So that's the idea of that. And there's, once again, I've already mentioned the number of the camshaft bearings. Once again, the 1 is the 1, the 4 and 2 is the 2 and 5, 4 and 3 is the 3 and 4. So just make sure you get that right. So before I install it, I put a black mark on the top of it when I'm going in the engine, because I can't see where the hole is once I start hammering it in. And that way I know if that black mark's at the top, then it's going in the right location. So there's a picture of my new camshaft tool, putting, I think, number 4 bearing in. It's a really nice tool. The cam bearing fits over it just nicely, and it hammers home nice and square, and I really like using that tool. The only problem with it, I've demonstrated it before in other videos, the only problem with it is it only fits small block Chevs, but fortunately that's probably the biggest part of my business is small block Chevs, so it works out for me. This is a picture of the cam box, and I've already described, it's a Howard's cam, and I've described the cam already in detail. So it's a brand new camshaft, of course, taking it out of the box. And we cleaned the camshaft up with solvent first to get any of the covering off of it, and then coat it with this stuff comes with it, the driven camshaft lube comes with the camshaft, so we coat that going in. And there's a picture of the cam going in, and basically as we insert the bearings, we make sure that we got lots of lube on the lobes, and then when we put the lifters in, we lube the lifters as well. So it's got the best chance possible of being a successful startup. Another picture of the camshaft going in, a couple more, and there it's finally all the way installed. Turned nice and smooth. no issues whatsoever, and once it's in, it stays in, it does not come out again. By the way, before I actually put the real camshaft in, I have a mock cam that I use in case there is any binding. I don't want to be playing around with my new cam. I tried it in there before, and I didn't take a picture of that, but it fit nice, so when I put the good cam in, I knew I was good to go. So this is a picture of the Felpro oil seal that I use. The number is there, BS11829-1. And the reason I use this, the standard number is Felpro 2900, I think. And what this seal does, I've talked about this before, the seal moves the contact point over on the crankshaft about 50,000 of an inch. So if you have some wear on your crankshaft and you use the standard seal, the seal lip's going to work in exactly the same area, and it's probably going to leak. So this is a good solution for that. However, having said that, Will's crankshaft wasn't even worn in that area. I couldn't even see where the seal contact point was, but this is still a good solution. It doesn't cost any more, so that's the one that I use. I recommend that if you're using the original Chevrolet crankshaft, it's always a good thing to do. So this shows here the seal going in. Always make sure that you have one side protruding about 3/8 of an inch from the other side, and the big part of the lip faces forward on the engine, and the main bearings, as you can see, are already, I got some assembly lube on them as well. And what I also do, I put a little dab of sealant on the edges of the seal. Now, the instructions don't tell you to do that, and you probably don't have to. You have to be careful doing it, that you don't get it in the wrong place, but if you get it where they butt together, it might be helpful to make sure you don't have a leak. Small block Chevrolets are notorious for main oil cell leaking, so you pretty much got to do everything that you can to make sure they don't. So that's my practice. And then when you put the main bearing on, it's offset by the same amount, so it just goes together nicely. And once it's together, it doesn't come back off. So this once again shows the seal in the main bearing, and you can see again, a little bit redundant maybe. There's a little dab on one side, and the other dab of Permatex goes on the main bearing cap on the other side. So that makes a good seal. So this picture is my Easy Bake oven. And so how do you get the crankshaft gear, new crankshaft gear on? You can hammer it on if you want, but I typically do is put it in my Easy Bake oven and let it sit there for 15 minutes or so at 400 degrees. You got to use your welding bit to put it on because it's going to be pretty hot, but it'll just knock right on. You don't have to bang it on whatsoever if you do that. We use that for bearings as well, not main bearings, but for roller bearings, and it works very well. So that's kind of backwards. I'm pulling the other, the old cam gear off, the original, the timing chain timing gear off the crankshaft. That's the one that came on there. This new one is a double roller. As you can see, the gear on the camshaft is a double roller, and the original gear was a single roller, right? So it goes off and we throw that away. So pretty much. The bolts that go into the camshaft are prepared with Permatex Loctite, not Permatex, Loctite, sorry, blue Loctite. And I torque them to 20 foot-pounds, and they're in to stay. And that's a picture of me torquing it, I guess. So now we're getting ready to put the piston rings in. One of the things that I do, these are not file fit rings. They're standard rings. They're chrome volley top rings, and of course cast second rings, and they're the rings that Sealed Power specifies with their pistons. But we still check all the ring end gaps. And before, I show one picture before and after, it's hard to tell, but I take a small file and just deburr the butt ends of the rings, because when you try to do your end gap measuring, because they've been sheared off, you leave a little bit of a burr there, and it makes it difficult to get an accurate measurement of the end gaps. So yeah, there's 8 top rings and 8 second rings, and these got 2 ends. So, but I take a little file and just kind of get the burrs off them to make sure we can get a good measurement. We got about 20 thou on the top ring and on the 22 thou on the top ring and 20 thou on the second ring. And one of the things to know is with the some of these pistons now are moving the location of the top ring up a little closer to the combustion, and therefore you need a little bit more end gap. But that's plenty, and we'll be very safe there with those numbers. So I checked every single one. So now I'm degreeing the camshaft. In this picture, I got the setup, finding top dead center. I've already mentioned in this video that using the timing mark, the aftermarket timing mark, which we had to because we had an aftermarket timing cover, and the original harmonic balancer, I'm not sure which one's off, but it's off. TDC was off by almost 4 degrees. So we find that first thing, and the method we use for that is you take an equal amount before and after top dead center on your dial indicator, divide by 2, and that tells you where the top dead center is. So just more pictures of the same mock-up. Now we've got a valve lifter in there. We're checking, to the point now, checking the camshaft center line, and same theory. You find a mark, usually go 50 thou before and after your intake closing point, and then I do it at 100 thou before and after as well. Use both those numbers, and if they're the same, then it kind of verifies you got it right. So this cam's actually, the center line's 104 degrees, and it's actually in at 102 degrees. And so it's advanced a couple degrees, not by design, it's just where it was. The notches on the timing gear are every 4 degrees, so if I use the next notch, I'd be 2 degrees retarded. I don't want that. And over time, the timing chain will probably stretch a little bit, so that 2 degrees of advance will probably go away. And as we know from previous dyno tests we've done, where a while ago we did the 400 where we actually moved the timing gear 4 degrees, it made almost no difference whatsoever. So if anything, that'll give us a little more compression pressure and typically more low end power, but the difference will be insignificant. So more pictures of the mock-up of the basically dial indicator right on your push rod on number one intake valve, and finding your top dead center and using your rotation to find the exact point at which your intake center line occurs. Once again, it's 102 degrees in this case. So the layout, the next one is the layout of the pistons and rings before I start. So one of the points I do, as you can see, I lay out all the rings for every piston on the bench. The pistons are already in order, the left bank and the right bank. And if you leave the piston rings in the bag and you go through your assembly and you put a piston in one at a time, and you get to the end and you got one left over, you're in big trouble, right? So what I do is I put them all on the bench, and when the one piston's in, there should be 7 left. And when 2 pistons are in, there should be 6 left, and so on. That way I can keep track of every ring, top, second, etc. And so this just shows the oil rings, because the piston, the top and second ring, are already in the cylinder. And I guess I didn't have a vid. Oh yeah, here we go. It's coming up. I'm sorry. So if I go over it, look, when I check the end gaps, I put the end gap for the top ring first, and then I push that down in the cylinder. Then the end gap for the second ring, push that down in the cylinder and leave it there. So when I get to number 1 cylinder, I don't have to look for the rings for number 1 cylinder. They're already in the cylinder. Pull them out, put them on that piston, and assemble them and put them in that way. That way it's pre-staged and you can't get mixed up. And when you do your end gaps, you just leave the rings right in there. I find that's the best way. When you assemble an engine, and think about how the factory does it, they try to do every procedure in a routine at the same time, and then do the next procedure at the same time. So don't do all the stuff to one piston and put it in, and then do all the stuff to the next piston. get yourself set up so when you go to assemble your pistons, the rings are there, the oil rings are sitting on the bench in order, the top and second pressure rings in the cylinder, and you just work your way through it, and it saves a lot of time. So there's a picture of all the rings in the cylinders, and once again, as I go through it, number one cylinder, I just pull that first ring out, it goes, it's the second ring, the next one's the first ring, put it on the piston, and away we go. So fortunately, I have the nice ring compressor for quite a few sizes. One of them is a 4.00, and so I have also got a universal one because I do so many different sizes, you can't afford them all, but I do have this one, so it makes it really nice to put the pistons in. You just make sure that the piston is totally inserted into the compressor before you start tapping on it. If you push hard, you can actually push it down with your fingers or a light butt end of a rubber hammer or whatever. It takes very little force to push the piston in. So looking ahead, I'm going to come back here. So one of the things that I also do, if you look at number 3 piston, is I lay out with a felt pen before I even start. The pistons are already numbered, and I mark the location of the top end ring gap, the second ring gap, the oil ring gaps on the piston before, and I do them all at once. So when I go to put the rings on, I don't have to look at which way they're orientated or which way the engine's facing. I know exactly where they go, and that saves a lot of time. You don't have to be fooling around. You just, the top compression ring location, the second compression ring location is already marked, and it's very, very easy to assemble it that way. So if you can see all those marks are on there, it's kind of my, it's pretty sloppy, but I know what it means to me, and it saves me a lot of time. So, so this shows the bottom of the block with, looks like in this picture, I think I've got all the rods in as well. So these are ARP rod bolts, 8740, I think they are, and the spec for them on the connecting rods, steel power connecting rods, is 45 foot-pounds, and that's what I've used, of course, and that's using the ARP lube on them as well. So ARP is good stuff, it works well, and if you buy new rods, typically that's what they come with. The main bearings are torqued to 80 foot-pounds, and the rods are 45 foot-pounds once again. So it just shows you all the pistons in. And one of the reasons I took all these pictures, I send them to Will, so he knows what I'm doing every day to his engine. He's 8 hours away from here, so it's an easy way to communicate with him. And there again, you can see the location on every piston of the location of the top and bottom ring, the oil rings, etc., and that just makes it a lot easier to put it together quickly. So, okay, next is the oil pump. So one of the things in a budget build, typically, you can reuse the oil pump. And these pictures show me disassembling and inspecting it, which I did. So one of the things you have to look for is if there's severe wear at the ends of the pump where the gears grind, that'll allow oil to transfer from the pressure side to the return side, and you will lose pressure. In this case, it was okay. And I took all the gears apart and checked them and cleaned them and put it back together. This picture is showing checking the pressure relief valve to make sure it's working properly. If it's sticking, then it's going to create a problem. But this one, I cleaned it up nicely and put it back in, and it works out real nice. And so one of the things you have to know about oil pumps, they're positive displacement gear pumps. When the gears turn, oil gets moved, or something will break. Unlike a water pump that's a centrifugal pump, for example, a geared pump is a positive displacement pump, and a few thaw wear here and there isn't going to hurt it. This thing had decent oil pressure when it was shut off, and it'll be just fine. And you also do not need, for a street engine, unless you've got something exotic going on that's going 5,000 or 5,500 RPM. This is a Melling M55 pump. So by reusing it, I was able to reuse the sump and disassemble it, clean it, assemble it, Put the cap back on, torque it to spec, and the pump's ready to go. And there's a picture of it installed in the engine, ready to go. The bolt that bolts that pump on is a special bolt. You have to have the right depth bolt, correct bolt, and you have to be careful. If you use one, it's a 7/16 bolt. It looks like a head bolt almost. And if you use one that's too long, it'll be pushing on your main bearing, and you don't want to be doing that. So I always make sure that that's done correctly. Another picture of the oil pump assembled on the block. Oil pan on. That was always a nice feeling. Getting the oil pan on. Used a one-piece oil pan gasket with the guides. This is a real nice piece. They're not cheap, but if you use the old cork gaskets, by the time you use a whole pile of Permatex on them, it's a messy ordeal. Sometimes they do leak. This is just a nice way to go, and I use these gaskets with every build now, exclusively. So no question there. So the oil pan's on, and they also come with their own bolts and everything, so it's ready to go. And the oil pan's on. And so once I get the oil pan on, I turn the engine, and it never gets turned again. And then we start working on the heads. So I installed new head bolts. This is a picture of the Elgin head bolts. They have the 1/2" hexes instead of the 5/8 hexes that the original head bolts. I did start thinking I might clean up bolts that we took out of Will's engine. They were just too grungy, so these are actually pretty economical. And there they are out of the box, all ready to go. They actually come with their own sealant already on them. And so what I did was, that saves me putting the white Permatex thread pipe sealer on every bolt, which is a messy job. They already have their own sealer. What I also did was use ARP lube under the head. So one of the issues when you torque a head bolt, a lot of the torque that you put into it gets used up in friction between the head of the bolt and the head. And so by using ARP, I had a little bit left over lube on there, and then I also, over top of the sealant, put some oil. So that, and before that, we make sure that we check every single hole. There's 17 head bolts on each side. Make sure every one is nice and clean. The bolt, I check a bolt in and out with a light torque on my small nut driver, and make sure it goes in and out smoothly. Because if you have a burr or something, that friction is going to take away from the torque that's supposed to be used to stretch your bolt. So there we are. We're almost back to where we are today. The cylinder heads are on, and actually from this picture I now have the water pump on. And next is a picture of the GM Delphi valve lifters. And so with the lifters, what I did was I did soak them in oil. Yeah, you probably don't have to. This engine will be primed, we'll have oil pressure, and we'll have pressure coming through every pushrod before this engine's cranked over. So probably redundant, but I did it anyways, doesn't hurt. Then I clean that surface off and put assembly lube on the bottom of the lifter as well before I install it. So these lifters come individually. The next clip is back to kind of where we are right now, checking the pushrod length. And as I already mentioned, we have to order pushrods. So we're kind of stuck with this part of the process. This little picture shows the numbers I took down. So the standard Chevrolet pushrod is 7.80. Actually measures 7.805, and Will's pushrods, the pushrod length that I need is 7.675. So that would have been 130 thou difference. That's quite a bit. So I ordered from Bill Little, I ordered new pushrods. So we're going to be waiting for that until Monday or Tuesday, and we'll go on. This is a picture of my little checking tool, this little duckbill device that I already talked about. So if you install, make sure your valve is closed. Install that on the pushrod. If you got a gap at your valve, then your pushrod's too long. If you got a gap at your pushrod, then your pushrod's too short. Okay, so, and then we use the pushrod checker to get that right. So that's typically how that goes. So that's where we are today, and we will go ahead and actually put the intake manifold on, get it on the test stand, and then when the push rods come in on Monday or Tuesday, we'll finish the assembly. Okay, to sum up, going to make some bullet points here about how, let's assume this engine advertised horsepower was 170, let's assume it was 200. We're hoping for something approaching 400, hopefully. So how do you get there? And I mentioned before, there are three main ways. You increase the compression, you improve the cam timing, and you improve the cylinder heads. And that's the three things we did. Let's start with cylinder heads. These cylinder heads are probably, these are the same cylinder heads I've got in my Camaro on the 350, and it's a 604 engine. I've dynoed that engine at 453 horsepower. So they're probably a little bit overkill, and people have made a comment on that. I was able to sell them to Will for a pretty good price because I had them. And so they're not going to hold us back for sure. Next, we improved the compression ratio from about 8.5 to about 10.5. That's a huge change. Speaking of the heads, by the way, if you want to improve your performance, we actually disassembled Will's engine here. He brought it right out of the Corvette about a month or so ago. And I took the cylinder heads and I put them out on my curb because there's a guy that goes by my house almost every day looking for scrap metal. And so he got a couple of cylinder heads along with some other stuff. That's what they're worth. Don't even spend your time or money on them. By the time you fix them, you'll spend just as much money as if you buy a decent set of heads. So one biggest thing probably to improve your performance is cylinder heads. And next is camshaft. So the original camshaft would have been 400 lift, 190, 205 duration, something like that on the original camshaft. So this one, I've already described the camshaft. It's going to be on the intake valve. We're going to use 1.6 rockers on the intake. So I'm going to have almost 500 lift. And on the exhaust, we're going to have 470 lift. So big improvement there. So compression, cylinder heads, camshaft. And of course, we're going to use a nice intake manifold. This is a Vortex style manifold because these are Vortex style heads. So the bolts bolt straight down on them. It's going to sit on there just like this. I haven't even mocked it up yet. And if you use my pins here, I should have one on each side. But this is a nice way to install it. It just lines right up. You don't have to worry about where the other style getting your squeezing your gasket or whatever. They go on pretty nice. So that's ways to do it. Will's bought a Holly Avenger 670 CFM carburetor for it, and we're going to actually start it and tune it on Will's carburetor. So one of the other things, if you're going to use a flat tappet cam, and we did, is a hydraulic roller cam will add at least $1,000 to the cost of the build. Use these GM Delphi lifters with the Stellite bottoms on them. I just pulled one out. It already had the lube on it. Mike found these for me. We've used them in the last few engines and no problems whatsoever. And it's got the lube on them, of course, all that stuff. I just pulled one out for demonstration purposes. So that's kind of a summary of things that we can do, you can do. Rocker arm ratio, compression height, get your dynamic compression. Our quench is going to be just under 50 thou. 45 would be a little bit nicer, but that's a pretty good number, and with this compression we'll be fine. And so I think I've kind of avoided or covered off the main points. So down to the tip of the day. I promised the tip of the day. So I always say plan your engine, or basically you're doing is designing your engine. When you start off with an engine like this, 200 horsepower, and you're trying to make 400, that's almost doubling it, or we may almost come close to doubling the horsepower. Plan it up front. How much power do you want? How much RPM are you going to go? How much is your car weigh? All that kind of stuff. But one of the most important things is calculating your static compression and dynamic compression. And your static compression is easy to do now. And back in the day when we didn't have all this stuff, we did it by the hard way. Now you can just Google it, and there's one of the good ones is Summit has an algorithm created. You just plug in the numbers and it'll give it to you right off without any, and I've verified it. I've checked those numbers against my own way of doing it, and they come right on. So you need to know your static compression, and then you need to know your dynamic compression. And the tip of the day is, because I had a few comments and questions on my channel about that, when you calculate your dynamic compression takes into account the most important factor is when your intake valve closes after bottom dead center. Use your advertised, not your at 50 number. Your at 50 number, just as it says, your valve's still off the seat, 50 thousandths of an inch. So you want to have that valve closed because nothing's going to get compressed until it does. If you calculate it based on your at 50 number, you're going to get, for this engine would be 9.75 or something, which would be way too high. Using the advertised duration number, it's like 8.75 or something. And then that calculation will give you your compression that you get, pressure you get using an ordinary compression gauge in your cylinder, cranking pressure. And that's the ultimate test. When we do an engine, we do all those calculations, and as soon as I got it broken in, I do a compression check with the compression gauge, and that validates whether or not we got it right or not. And usually we're pretty darn close. So, key point, use your advertised duration number for determining when your intake valve closes after bottom dead center when you're calculating dynamic compression, or you'll get the wrong answer. Okay? Once again, thanks. Please like and subscribe. If you're still watching, US friends, happy Thanksgiving. Thank you for watching Gold Scratch.